Hello, my name is Elizabeth Ashley and my co host is Michelle Roques-O'Neil. Together, we have 7 decades of experience of blending spiritual practices with essential oils. Our show is called How to Be a Shapeshifter, and together we'll be changing your mindset with essential oil blends for happiness and strategies for success. Welcome to our first episode. Am I an addict?
Hello, and today Michelle and I are going to talk about, am I addicted? I don't know about you, but I've been picking up my phone way more times than I should do. And we're not necessarily talking about the hardcore drugs world here, but more about things like, with me, sugar, caffeine, scrolling. So, Michelle, you any thoughts about am I addicted?
Absolutely. I think we are all subtly addicted at the moment. I think it's something that's embedded itself very, very um, subtly in our day-to-day lives, whether it's kind of binging on TV series, um, playing games on your phone. I know I'm guilty of that. Sometimes when I want to check out, I'll just play a word game and I suddenly find maybe 35 minutes have gone by and I've been on it for that amount of time. Um, I think shopping obsessively, maybe buying stupid things you don't need, the Primark factor, buying clothes that are really cheap, filling your wardrobe. What is it actually filling? Is it, what is the emotion it is looking after there? Is it actually filling that emotion? So yes, I kind of think there are many different subtle levels of people being addicted.
Saw a great quote by, do you ever watch the psychologist Gabor Morte? I
Oh,
said
I
you don't.
do. I do.
Yeah. So he says that addiction is the opposite, the polar opposite of connection.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that really feels strong to me, because I wouldn't really have thought of, like, as bee priestesses, we talk about how we walk the eight as like exploring the different polarities, and I wouldn't have even have thought of an opposite to addiction. So the feeling that we are addicted, showing that we are not connected to something, feels really illuminating to me.
Yeah, no, I think I have myself been aware of that because I kind of think addiction fulfills something that's missing in your life, whether it's connection with other people. So you get your connection maybe through watching Instagram or TikTok, but it's not a true connection. Um, I think there is a great sadness in the world. I don't think people even spend time in a connected way anymore. We very seldom really take time to sit at a table and switch the television off and switch our phones off. How often do you go to a restaurant and you see people with their phones on the table? I've seen so many instances where I've gone to a coffee shop and a man and a woman or two women are sitting opposite each other and they're looking at their phones. And you
Yeah, and I don't mind saying I find it quite hard to hold a long conversation with somebody now, because your brain's so geared up to, well, that's interesting, I want to look that up. And
okay.
so it's almost like the goldfish bowl attention for me.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got out of practice of having conversations. I mean, if you think about it, um, we used to phone people up and talk to them. I remember as a schoolgirl or, having really long conversations with friends for maybe an hour. And now I barely pick up the phone to ring somebody. And I am actually consciously now trying to repair that. Like when I'm leaving a message for friends, say on WhatsApp, I'd rather leave a voice message so they can hear my voice and they can hear the nuances of what I'm saying, rather than getting a message, because I think that is a disconnect, isn't it? Sending texts.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what I've noticed. I don't feel like I can just pick up and ring somebody without saying, "Will you be free at this time?"
I know.
We would never have done that before, would we?
There isn't that kind of spontaneity. People have got so busy doing busyness, but what does that busyness mean? I think
Mm.
it's all quite empty, actually. It's
Mm.
filling up time. It's actually because we, as human beings, our biology is based on being habitual. So we're very linear in the way that we connect with things. And it's very repetitive. And a lot of our reactions are to our external world. So they will often be as a reaction to being rejected, a reaction to being frightened, to being isolated. So in order to do that, we then do something for ourselves that creates a protective pattern.
Yeah,
Then,
and it's a procrastination as well, isn't it? And I think you're absolutely right when we talk about my addiction. I don't drink really. I can't drink. I can't like sniff the barmaid's apron and I'm drunk. I can't take any kind of stimulants like caffeine. So I don't have those. But for me, sugar's the baby,
yeah,
and and I kind of feel like I hate that I'm getting bigger, but I almost feel like, well, good. I've got a protective layer around me. I don't have to worry about people wolf whistling. I don't know if that's even a thing anymore. I don't think people do that anymore. But that kind of attention can feel quite aggressive sometimes, can't it? So
yeah.
the so I remember you saying something about sweetness with sugar.
Yeah. One of the modalities I work is to do with life isn't very sweet, so you create sweetness for your life. And sometimes we go through periods where we're actually every ounce of us is being called upon to be strong. And so, you know, you may lean heavily on cigarettes, you may lean heavily on alcohol, you may lean heavily on sugar, you know it doesn't really matter, and you could, if you're working really hard or you've got pressure from above to work at a certain level, people get addicted to having loads of espressos, with the idea that it's keeping them going. And in fact, it's not, it gives you a false high. And that's how you get addicted to caffeine, because you droop almost 15 minutes after you've had the espresso, and so then you take another one, and then eventually the adrenaline and the cortisol kicks in.
Yeah, adenosine receptor. And I think this is probably a good place to bring in our first essential oil, because vanilla absolute and the smell of vanilla, so even vanilla extract, is proven to reduce cravings for sugar. And I love that, because who doesn't like the smell of somebody baking a Victoria sponge? I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
if ever there
Totally.
was a an essential oil that needs a new press officer, it's vanilla. Fancy calling things that are boring vanilla. It's just like so luscious, and it really does feel like the sweetness of light, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So it's fascinating to see that they've proven that if you sit and inhale the smell of vanilla, eventually what will happen is your cravings for sugar will be satisfied by the scent and drop down. Ain't that fantastic for somebody who wants to lose weight?
absolutely. And I suppose that kind of affects your pineal gland, doesn't it? Because it kicks in your olfactory memory and probably reminds you of times where you've been comforted by that smell, as you said, a wonderful Victoria sponge or Madeira cake baking. And it just gives you that comfort. Funnily enough, I read a book by Elizabeth Gilbert, and the whole book is about kind of vanilla. It's set in the time of the East India Company, and basically she's a botanist, and her father is a botanist, and it's all about how they go on this thing of harvesting vanilla, which comes from an orchid. And
Yes.
initially, it came from Madagascar, I think. And
Yeah.
and then her father created a exploration to Tahiti, which is where now the other type of vanilla is grown. And actually, it took ages for them to get it to kind of grow within that climate. And it's just a fascinating book about, you don't realize that there are all these kind of journeys these plants go through to come to you.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is about. I always say you can tell a really good little boy because he's got a fascination with sticks. And it was a little boy with a stick that learned how to pollinate vanilla. Did you know that? He watched that the bee that it could only be pollinated by this particular orchid bee, and he was like, "Oh, well, no, that doesn't make sense to me." And he did. He pollinated it himself, moved the pollen from one to another. He's only something like 12, and
Yeah.
transformed the whole vanilla um, experience for the world, which is fascinating. Yeah.
Wow, I mean, maybe Elizabeth made that whole story up.
Well, I don't know because I think that was on Reunion actually. So and it might predate her story, mightn't it? But
Yeah.
yeah, so another oil which I find is really interesting, the research behind black pepper and people who have cravings for cigarettes.
Yeah. So black pepper, I think, is one of those oils that is quite an aggressive smell if you think about it. And I think it's like a quick, sharp shock that shocks you out of a craving. There are different oils that do that sort of thing, like peppermint, for example. That's another catalyzing oil that snaps you out of a fixation, if you like.
Yeah. I always say, I don't know whether it's separate to what we're talking about or not until I've said it, but black pepper, when I'm working with it, it's very useful for people who are thinking about everything else but not themselves. And maybe that is what's helpful with the craving, because it is very good at being able to say, but what about you? And I
Yeah.
suppose that kind of is bringing your awareness back to not really following a very good path for yourself, which is a really good message to give somebody who is addicted, I guess.
Well, yeah, and I guess that thing of looking after other people is kind of rescuing. Another word would be rescuing, and sometimes um, at the core of that is a self-worth issue, isn't it? So, you may want to, maybe that black pepper just instills a little bait backbone because it's quite a kind of sharp, strong, metallic aroma. And I kind of think, if you think about Chinese medicine and the metal element is all about cutting through things. And I would say
Yeah,
pepper, it's called Xing Yi, and if you think about metal, think of a metal sword, it just cuts through and creates clarity. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to shift someone out of a habitual mindset, if you like.
I love that. What is it called? Xing Yi.
Xing Yi, yeah, it was something I've studied qigong for a long time, and this always stuck in my head. That my teacher taught me this thing. We were doing a a sort of practice session at the beginning of our class about kung fu, and Xing Yi was one of the concepts, and she was making us walk and pretend we were like slicing through any kind of obstacle we had. And it was like a very qigong kind of walk, but it felt really powerful because of the way you had to slice through things. If you think about a Japanese sword, like a samurai sword, it doesn't mince around, it can cut through an onion in one swipe, an apple in one swipe. So it's that kind of cutting motion.
Yeah, because you are very much tied to an addiction, aren't you? And it's funny actually, because that was going to be a similar sort of energetic that I was going to talk about. Angelica root, I think, is very good for this kind of work. So Angelica sometimes is called St. Michael's weed because it flowers on May 8th.
Yeah.
And that's St. Michael's Day. And St. Michael, he's always portrayed as like the warrior of the angels, isn't he? He leads the angels into battle. And I always think it's got like that nature of the sword being cutting through ties, cutting through threads that bind you. So it's similar kinds of energy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting because I work with Archangel Michael a lot when I'm doing my clearing work, my house clearing, because I do a lot of clearing for people. I've sort of cleared restaurants and hotels and houses for people, and it's always Michael I call in, and definitely the energy is one of fast moving energy that doesn't, very concise, very directed energy.
Yes, as if he doesn't have time for
Exactly.
negotiations. He has
It's
to be
not about
everywhere.
having a conversation. It's about, right,
Exactly.
okay, so I'll go, can you please clear this now, immediately? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Oh God.
exactly. Such a powerful oil, Angelica root.
Yes,
Um,
it is. Weirdly, it's not one I use enough of. I guess we all get drawn to our own particular oils that that we spend a lot of time with, like for example, for me, I love patchouli oil, and I have done since I was very, very young, I really like the smell of it, and I know it's not an oil that everybody likes, and everybody kind of misinterprets it often as essential oil. And I actually think it's a very good step up from vetiver. So when people are feeling a little bit out of sorts, a little bit ungrounded, and they want to reach a kind of tranquil place, I think patchouli is a very, very good oil for taking you to that sort of centered but not knocked out. You've not been knocked around the lugs, I've got a very good story about vetiver, which I'll tell you later. But yes, it kind of takes you to that realm, which is sort of, so it takes you kind of, I think, into an alpha state rather than keeping you at beta. So beta,
you're preaching to the choir because I am also a big advocate of patchouli, and I think actually in the context of am I an addict? I probably wouldn't have put this on the list, but I do think it's very good at bringing you down out of your head into your body. And I
yes.
think that is really important in this kind of work, that you are not motivated or pushed, controlled by your thoughts, especially subconscious thoughts,
Absolutely. I think the power to change anything comes from within. So, oils that help to open that internal power of quietening the mind and allowing you to connect and meditate, perhaps to reflect, to do breath work. I think those oils are incredibly important. People tend to generally launch towards frankincense, for that sense of calm, which is a beautiful oil. But I tend to recommend frankincense to people more if they feel very vulnerable and very open, almost overly sensitive to everything that's going on around them. And I think when you have that sense of being addicted to something where you have no control over it, I think you probably veer from feeling overly confident to feeling a bit shameful about the fact that something has got that sort of power over you. And I think frankincense is a wonderful connector and a calmer and a sort of cloak that allows you to step back and kind of see what choices you have there.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I'm thinking about what Gabor Mate said about connection, and I think oils that make you feel more like you're connected to what's going on around you, what's your relationship, your household, so that you come out of your head back into the world, I think are useful. And so in thinking that probably for that, I would quite like to work with ylang ylang oil. What's your thoughts there?
I love ylang ylang.
Mm.
I don't use it in large quantities. I use it very, very sparingly. I don't think you need that much. I think as an aroma within, say, a blend, I think it can overtake a blend. And I think I know people again are in love with the idea of ylang being this very sensual oil. And I think on one level, it's something we do need to do, ground our sense of who we are, our bodies. I think often there's not a lot of self-love. And I think something like ylang ylang helps you to connect with that more sensual, juicy side of your character. I
Mm.
think which is often missing when people start looking outside for ways of kind of filling that gap. So I think ylang ylang for me is very good for waking up that sense of inner sensuality, and that doesn't have to be overtly sexual in a wayward way. It can be an enjoyment of who you are and your your femininity or even your masculinity. It doesn't really matter. It's not a gender thing, you know. I think often men can lose it, especially nowadays. A lot of men don't have a sense of where they belong. So they feel very confused. They feel very overwhelmed by where they are in the world anymore. All the natural standards have sort of, all the lines being blurred. I know my son, for example, who's in his 30s, he finds it very confusing at the moment, sexuality and relationships and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we're going off topic a bit now, but I think for the younger generation of men who are being influenced by this incel idea of like hating women, it's really becoming very polarized, isn't it? And it's quite hard to have healthy, in inverted commas, opinions about sex when you're polarized in that way. And I think ylang ylang is very good at being able to bring those together.
Yes, and I think they're polarized. I mean, but that in itself is, you know, addictive behavior when you start listening to people who are kind of giving you an answer that may not be because of their forcefulness. It's almost they're pulling you into resonance with them. And before you know it, you're kind of getting locked into an ideology that possibly wasn't you at all, but
For sure.
because there was a sense of loss or a sense of not belonging or knowing where you are. So it goes back to this sense of knowing is very important. And I think for me, that's where essential oils play a really big part, you know, connecting the emotional and the physical body together. And I find for myself, I use sandalwood for that because I think it is a very good connector. It works with the solar plexus to connect the upper chakras to the lower chakras and gives stability to that so that there can be communication between your higher self and your material self. I think a lot of people are walking around very disconnected at the moment.
I agree totally. So sandalwood's not really one of my go-to oils, although I have to say Adam that I do the Fellowship of Essential Oils, he just loves every possible type of sandalwood. So I do think that I'm probably missing something. So can you speak a bit more to that idea of connecting the upper and lower parts?
Well, I think there are a lot of people who are quite traumatized, and when we get traumatized, we schism and there's a dislocation, and we're no longer unified, if you like. We're not working from a polarity that's vertical. We're working on a diagonal. So bringing your body back into balance is about finding this vertical polarity. And partly that can be done with, depending on where you feel unstable. So, for example, if you don't feel rooted, using something like vetiver is vetiver is very powerful, because vetiver is something that literally roots you when your soil is very fragile. It allows you to find stability when everything is moving. So often when people are very unstable, they will be very high frequency energy in their mind. Their mind will be overworking, and they will really I've had people have such strong reactions to things like vetiver, because it actually doesn't, it overwhelms that part of them that wants to kind of stay ungrounded. And so it's kind of literally pulling your energy down to earth.
Yeah.
And then to use something, interestingly, they're all woods. I would use something like vetiver, patchouli, sandalwood, and I would work with them in alignment to kind of bring all of those different energies together, so they're running very, very smoothly down the center.
Yeah. I'm just gonna input there before we get loads of messages. Yes, we know vetiver's a root. Yes, we know patchouli's a leaf, but it has that woody feeling about it, doesn't it? When you're working with it.
Absolutely. You're talking much more about the aroma here, because actually we're talking about smelling things, and through that olfactory sense, when you're kind of sniffing them, you're actually activating your pineal gland and your memory and your trauma patterns and all of those kind of things. So when you're taking that, you're taking it into the brain and into the nervous system. And the overall aroma, I think sometimes we're very literal about aromas, because of where they come from.
Yeah.
And it's really important to understand what they evoke, what they smell like, the smell memory you have to it, and actually how they make your body feel when you're using it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the one oil that I have worked with really successfully with addictions is when people are coming off hard drugs, like heroin, and they're suffering withdrawal. Rose oil is absolutely fantastic for, well, it has an anti-conflict side as well. So if you're coming off something and it makes you very ratty, that's helpful. But in rat trials, for example, they've proven that it stops them writhing and stops them scratching at themselves and just makes them feel much more calmer. And there's been a few situations where people have messaged me and said, I've got a child who's withdrawing from heroin. Is there any support that you can give? And I think that rose oil can be so helpful in those situations. I
Yeah.
think it would be useful now to think of a couple of strategies to give people. If you were thinking, right, okay, I'm going to show somebody how to use an essential oil in this situation, what would your go-to way to do it be?
I think probably through the sense of smell, maybe putting a drop of it on the palm of your hand, warming it up between the palms, and then holding it over your nose, and maybe taking 3 sniffs. So not just one deep breath, but 3 light sniffs, so that you can saturate your the receptors in your nose. The other thing is, you could obviously you could anoint it on specific points. So always the crown of the head. If it's something where, for example, you're feeling really attacked, or bombarded, you could put it on the back of your neck, just where the C7 vertebrae is. That little protrusion? That's the psychic center. It actually picks up a lot of bad vibes. So even sweeping frankincense around there every morning before you go out protects you from picking up other people's bad vibes. Another key place is the solar plexus. Because the vagus nerve goes all the way down from the brain to the gut, it actually runs through the solar plexus. And the solar plexus is like our emotional brain. So we pick up, it's like an emotional antennae. So again, it's another one of those sensing parts of our body that picks up vibrations. And if we're not careful, we can lock them in. So just putting that on your solar plexus and massaging it anti-clockwise, so that you're actually unwinding the solar plexus. You can also do this with breath. Lastly, there are 2 points on your wrist. If you measure 3 fingers from the edge of your palm, there's a point called the pericardium 6 point, and this releases anxiety. So it has a very immediate effect. The pericardium is linked to the heart. It's the sac around the heart, if you're thinking in biological terms, but in Chinese medicine, it's the heart protector. It's the protector of the heart. So we always use the pericardium 6 when people are really highly anxious, and I always teach them to massage that to calm themselves down. So if you put an oil there, it's going to really have a really powerful effect on your nervous system.
I love that. My always go-to way is to have an aroma pendant to wear the scent. I have to say, with your ylang, you're going to go about 3/4 of an hour and then go, can't do that anymore. Swap it over. But great for blood pressure in particular. And I really find people get good results as well from inhaling the essential oil and doing automatic writing.
Yeah.
So really starting to just scribble about anything, and then just wait and ask yourself, what is my association with this cigarette? Why do I feel like I need to have sugar? And it's amazing how the brain taps into the molecules, takes you to a memory place, and really you can just don't think about what you're writing, but just write. And it's amazing how many answers you can come out with that.
Absolutely. And I suppose in the same way you could use tapping.
Yeah, for sure.
As you're asking the question, and then you can start actually breaking the pattern, and doing the taps. That's a quick tapping method, but it's a very, very quick way of breaking an addiction or a pattern, because it gets down to the core of why. Because at the end of the day, any of these addictive patterns are all to do with emotional memories that have got stuck and that we haven't sorted out in our brain. And sometimes we allow those fears to rule our lives, when actually, if we took a moment to stop and look at them and actually nurture them and nourish them and love them and release them, we could be very free of addiction very quickly.
True.
Yeah.
Essentials are such tremendous helpers. And so if you've enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll be back with more thoughts about how to be a shapeshifter with essential oils in the very near future. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.